It was late summer of 2019. Lucas and his girlfriend, Emily, had been driving across Nevada for hours. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides, and the highways seemed to disappear into blackness. By midnight, they were running low on gas. Finally, a single neon sign glowed in the distance. It was an old gas station, half lit, with a few flickering bulbs over the pumps. The place looked deserted, but Lucas pulled in. The air was dead quiet. No cars, no sound. Just the steady hum of the overhead light buzzing above the pump. Emily went inside to grab snacks, leaving Lucas outside to fill the tank. That's when he noticed he wasn't alone. The pump clicked as the gas flowed, and Lucas leaned against the car, trying to shake off the exhaustion from the long drive. The silence of the desert pressed down on him. Even the crickets were absent, and the stillness felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. He glanced toward the store window where Emily was inside, grateful for the faint light spilling onto the pavement. That's when he caught it again, the faintest sense of movement in his peripheral vision. Across the cracked lot, near the edge where the light faded into pitch black, something stood. At first, Lucas thought it was a sign or maybe a piece of equipment, but then it shifted, just enough to erase any doubt. It was a man. His posture was rigid, almost mannequin-like, and Lucas couldn't see his face from this distance. He just stood there, not moving, not speaking. The longer Lucas looked, the more wrong it felt. People in empty parking lots usually waved, nodded, or made some gesture. This guy gave nothing, just silence and stillness. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck and turned back to the pump, telling himself not to be paranoid, but his instincts screamed at him. He could feel those unseen eyes locked on him, heavy and unblinking. Every time he glanced back, the figure hadn't moved an inch. A low hum from the lights buzzed above, flickering once. In that split second of darkness, Lucas swore the man was closer than before. But when the light steadied, he was still at the same spot, or at least he thought so. His heart began to pound, his grip tightening on the pump handle. Emily walked out of the store a moment later with a small bag in her hand, smiling at first, but her smile faded the moment she saw Lucas's face. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, following his line of sight. That's when she saw him too. The stranger, still as stone, head just slightly tilted, like a bird studying prey. "Get in the car," Lucas said under his breath. His tone made Emily's stomach drop. She didn't argue, just quickened her pace, unlocking the door and sliding inside. Lucas yanked the nozzle out, tossed it back onto the pump, and moved quickly to the driver's seat. As soon as the engine roared to life, the man began to move. Slowly, his steps were dragging, steady, deliberate. He was walking directly toward them, and with every step, the glow of the overhead light revealed more. His clothes were dirty, hanging loose on his frame. His head tilted further with each movement, like his neck was broken in several places. Lucas's hands shook as he shoved the gear into drive. But before he hit the gas, the man stopped dead in the center of the lot. Under the buzzing light, his face finally came into view. The mouth was stretched into a grin so wide it looked painful, his teeth bared, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't blink once. He just stared at them, smiling. Emily's voice cracked as she whispered, "Lucas, go." And he did. Tires screeched against the concrete as the car peeled out of the lot, gravel spitting from under the wheels. Emily turned in her seat, her breath catching in her throat. The man hadn't chased them. He hadn't moved. He was still standing under that flickering light, that same sickening smile carved across his face, watching as their car disappeared into the night. For the rest of the drive, neither of them spoke. The image of that man burned into their minds, and the silence that followed them on the highway felt just like it had at that gas station. Heavy, unnatural, like someone or something was still watching. Across the lot, Standing just outside the reach of the lights was a man. At first, Lucas thought maybe he was a homeless drifter, but the way the man stood was unnatural. Spotty, completely still, arms stiff at his sides, head tilted ever so slightly. He wasn't walking toward the store, wasn't smoking, wasn't moving, just staring. Lucas tried not to look, but every time his eyes flicked back, the man hadn't shifted an inch. His face was hidden in shadow, but Lucas could feel the eyes locked on him. "Hey," Lucas called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. "You good, man?" The figure didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't wave. Tilted his head a little further, though studying him. The hair on Lucas's arms rose. Lucas's voice echoed across the lot, swallowed quickly by the surrounding emptiness. The man didn't shift, didn't even twitch. The silence that followed was heavier than before, like the desert air had thickened. Lucas's pulse throbbed in his ears, and every instinct inside him screamed that something wasn't right. He gripped the pump tighter, forcing himself to look away, but his body refused to relax. He kept stealing glances, hoping maybe the figure would wander off or reveal itself as just some harmless traveler. But each time, the man was in the exact same place, same stance, same tilt of the head. The distance between them wasn't far, but it felt like miles of dread pressing down. Lucas licked his lips and muttered to himself, "Just ignore it. Get the gas, get out." The light above the pump flickered again, buzzing louder this time. For a second, the lot dipped into near darkness, and Lucas's stomach twisted when his eyes adjusted. The man looked closer. Not by much, but enough to send a chill crawling down his spine. He hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard gravel crunch, but there he was, 5, maybe 6 feet nearer. A faint metallic clank came from behind Lucas, making him spin around with his heart in his throat. But it was only the pump clicking, the tank now full. He yanked the nozzle out and shoved it back into place, but his hands were trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. His breath came out in short bursts, fogging slightly in the night air, even though it wasn't cold. He risked another glance toward the shadowy figure. This time, he caught something new, a slight twitch in the head, like it had tilted further. The posture looked unnatural, like a doll being bent the wrong way. Lucas's throat went dry. He wanted to yell again, but something inside him told him not to draw more attention, not to test whatever this was. Then came the sound of the store door opening behind him. Emily stepped out, holding a bag of snacks, the fluorescent light from inside spilling out around her. Lucas felt an almost desperate relief, but it vanished when he saw her expression. She followed his gaze to the figure, and her face drained of color. "Lucas," she whispered. Her voice cracked, barely audible. "He's looking right at us." Lucas forced himself to move, motioning for her to hurry. "Get in the car," he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily didn't argue. She hurried to the passenger side and slid in, slamming the door shut. Lucas moved quickly to the driver's side, but before he could climb in, he risked one more look. The man had moved again. No sound, no warning. He was now standing just at the edge of the light, and for the first time, Lucas could make out more of his face. Not details, not yet, but enough to know the man was staring directly at him. Chin lowered slightly, the smile beginning to stretch. It wasn't wide yet, but it was there, curling unnaturally at the corners of his mouth. Lucas slid into the driver's seat, slamming the lock down. His hands fumbled on the keys, the sound of them jingling far too loud in the suffocating silence. Emily clutched the bag of snacks to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on the windshield. The man was walking now, one step at a time, shoes scraping against the gravel. The sound cut through the night, slow and deliberate. Lucas finally twisted the ignition, the engine roaring to life. The sound filled him with momentary relief, but the man didn't stop. He just kept walking, slow and steady, as though he knew they weren't going anywhere until he decided. Emily whispered, "Lucas, please." Her hand gripped his arm, trembling. He pressed his foot on the gas, ready to bolt, but something made him hesitate. The man had reached the center of the lot, under the flickering light. His face was fully visible now, and it wasn't just a smile. It was a grin, too wide, stretching his skin in a way that didn't look natural. His eyes were wide and glossy, locked on them without blinking. Lucas's body went cold. That image burned into him, so wrong, so inhuman. And then he slammed the gas pedal down, tires screeching as the car shot forward, leaving the man behind in the vibrating glow of the failing light. Emily came out of the store, holding a bag of chips. She noticed Lucas's stiff posture and followed his gaze. "Who is that?" she whispered. Before Lucas could answer, the man stepped forward, slowly, his shoes scraping the gravel. "Get in the car," Lucas muttered. They climbed inside and locked the doors. Lucas tried to start the car, but his hands were shaking. The man walked closer, his pace deliberate. When he reached the edge of the pump area, he stopped. That's when the light finally hit his face. He was smiling, not a normal smile. Too wide, too stretched, teeth glinting in the light. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, locked on Lucas and Emily. He didn't say a word, just smiled. Emily's breath hitched as she pressed herself back into the seat, her eyes glued to the windshield. The man didn't move, didn't twitch, just stood there with that grin stretched across his face. Lucas could feel the engine vibrating beneath him, but his hands wouldn't move from the wheel. It was as if his body was frozen, caught in the grip of that awful smile. Seconds passed like hours. The buzzing of the light above them grew louder in the silence, the flickering casting jerky shadows across the lot. Every time the light blinked, it almost seemed like the man's posture shifted slightly, shoulders hunched a little more, head tilted at a sharper angle. But when the light steadied, he was always in the same spot. Emily whispered, "Why is he just standing there?" Her voice trembled, barely louder than a breath. Lucas couldn't answer. His throat felt closed, the words trapped inside him. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and finally forced the car into gear. The tires crunched against the gravel as the car began to roll forward. The man's grin widened, his lips stretched unnaturally far, and his teeth gleamed in the sickly yellow light. Lucas pressed harder on the gas, urging the car toward the exit, but his eyes betrayed him and flicked back to the figure. The man had taken a single step forward, and then another, slow, purposeful, his eyes never leaving theirs. Emily's hand shot out, clutching Lucas's arm. "He's coming closer," she hissed, her voice breaking with panic. Lucas tried to speed up, but the exit ramp seemed impossibly far away, the car crawling as though something heavy pressed against it. They slammed the gas, the engine roaring louder. But it felt like the man was closing the distance faster than the car was leaving. The light flickered once more, plunging the lot into darkness for a split second. When it snapped back on, the man wasn't at the edge of the pump anymore. He was closer, standing dead center in their lane, directly in front of the car. His grin was so wide it looked carved into his face, his head twitching at a sharp angle that made his neck look broken. Lucas's heart thudded violently in his chest. He swerved hard to avoid him, tires screeching as the car lurched toward the opposite side of the lot. Emily screamed as her body slammed against the door, but the car kept moving. Lucas dared to glance in the rearview mirror. The man hadn't chased him. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there in the middle of the lot, illuminated in the shrinking circle of light, smiling, watching as they sped down the empty highway. Emily kept turning in her seat, staring back at the vanishing glow of the gas station. Her voice was shaky, uneven. "Lucas, he didn't even try to follow us." Lucas didn't respond. He knew she was right, and somehow that was worse. The way the man just stood there, letting them leave, smiling like he knew something they didn't. That image was carved into Lucas's mind. The road ahead stretched into endless black, but no matter how far they drove, he couldn't shake the thought that, somewhere, the dark, that man was still standing still, watching, and maybe even waiting for them to stop again. The night felt heavier now, the silence unbearable, as if the desert carried that grin with them, lingering in the shadows just beyond the headlights. Lucas slammed the gear into drive and floored it. The car shot out of the lot, tires screeching. Emily twisted in her seat, staring out the back window. "He's not chasing us," she said. Lucas glanced into the rearview mirror. The man was still standing at the edge of the lot, smiling, his body perfectly still. The neon light flickered above him, making his shadow dance across the ground. Even as the car disappeared into the desert night, he never moved. For the rest of the drive, Lucas couldn't shake that image. A stranger, smiling in the dark, watching them leave, as if he had been waiting for them all along. Lucas tried to focus on the road ahead, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling on the steering wheel. The desert stretched on endlessly, the headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the blackness. Emily was still turned halfway in her seat, her wide eyes locked on the darkness shrinking behind them, as if she expected that figure to come sprinting out of the night at any second. When she finally turned forward, her face was pale. "That wasn't normal," she whispered. "Nobody just stands there like that." Her voice shook, like she was trying to convince herself she'd even seen what she saw. Lucas didn't answer. He didn't want to. Speaking the words out loud would make it too real. The road hummed under the tires, the sound usually comforting, but now it only felt like background noise against the memory of that grin. The longer Lucas thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The man's smile hadn't looked forced, it hadn't looked nervous or even threatening. It had looked like he was pleased, like he'd been waiting. Every now and then, Lucas checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights. There was nothing. It's black highway behind them, the kind of black that swallows anything beyond a few feet. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him. It's as if that man's stare had followed them out of the lot and onto the open road. Emily broke the silence again, her voice low. "What if he follows us? What if he finds out where we're going?" Lucas gritted his teeth and shook his head. "He's not following. He was just some creep." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew he didn't believe them. The miles crawled by, the dashboard clock ticking slower than it should. Every curve of the road made Lucas tense, expecting to see someone standing on the shoulder, waiting. The longer they drove, the more he realized his knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. They passed an old billboard, half-rotted, its paint peeling. In the split second it caught the headlights, Lucas swore he saw a shape standing just beneath it. His chest seized, but when he blinked, it was gone. Nothing but shadows and brush. He didn't say anything to Emily. He didn't want her to panic. The silence in the car grew heavier. Emily sat with her arms crossed tightly, her body pressed against the door as though distance from the center of the car would protect her. Every few minutes, she'd look out the side window, squinting into the dark, then turn back with a shudder. By the time they passed the next tiny town, Lucas realized he hadn't seen another car in over an hour. No headlights ahead, no taillights behind, just the empty road, and the memory of that man's smile burned into both of their minds. Lucas finally muttered, "Don't worry, we're fine now. He's gone." But the words were hollow. The look on Emily's face told him she didn't believe him either. That smile was too vivid, too deliberate. It wasn't the kind you forget, okay? And deep down, Lucas had the sickening thought that the man hadn't stayed behind at all. Somehow, in some way he couldn't explain, the man was still with them, unseen but close, waiting for the next time they would have to stop. Story 2, The Hitchhiker on Highway 50. Clara had been driving for hours, the endless stretch of Highway 50 unraveling in front of her like a black ribbon. Didn't he call it the loneliest road in America for nothing? Mile after mile of flat desert, empty hills, and silence. The clock on the dash read 1:13 a.m. and her eyelids were heavy, but she couldn't stop now. The nearest town was still hours away. The isolation was crushing. No other cars, no sound except the low hum of her engine. She rolled down her window, letting the cold desert air sting her face to stay awake. That's when she saw him. A figure appeared in the glow of her headlights. A man standing on the shoulder of the road, thumbs stuck out stiffly. A hitchhiker. Clara's heart jumped, but she didn't slow down. She had promised herself years ago that she'd never pick anyone up, especially not at night. As she passed him, her stomach knotted. His face flashed for just a second in the headlights. Pale skin, almost gray, and hollow, dark eyes. His expression wasn't pleading like most hitchhikers. He was just S-T-R-I-N-G. Clara sat in the dimly lit motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper as if it might move. She could still see his face in her mind, the way it had glowed pale against the desert night. She tried to tell herself she was just tired, that her imagination had been cruel. But deep down, she knew she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she shut her eyes, she pictured him standing at the edge of the bed, thumb stuck out like he was still asking for a ride. At one point, she swore she heard the sound of gravel crunching outside, footsteps dragging slowly across the parking lot. When she dared to peek through the blinds, nothing was there but her own car under the buzzing streetlight. Around 3 in the morning, she thought she finally drifted off, but she woke to the sound of a door slamming. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, but realized it wasn't hers. The hallway outside the room was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. Clara told herself it was just another guest. Still, she locked the chain on her door and left the lamp on. When morning came, sunlight pouring through the window gave her some comfort. She packed quickly and checked out without even showering. The clerk, the same one from last night, avoided her eyes when he handed back her change. It was as if he already knew what she had seen on that road, and he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Back in her car, the daylight made her feel braver. She told herself it had all been some strange mix of exhaustion and paranoia. The desert looked different now, golden and quiet instead of black and endless. She thought maybe, just maybe, she'd imagined the whole thing. But 40 minutes into the drive, Clara's stomach dropped. Up ahead, standing at the edge of the road, was the hitchhiker. She gripped the wheel, her body going cold. It was broad daylight now. There were no tricks of the night to excuse this. The same man, the same posture, the same lifeless eyes staring into her windshield as she sped past. She wanted to scream, but her throat locked. This wasn't just some late-night hallucination. He was real, or at least, something about him was real enough to follow her. She checked her mirrors constantly, her pulse thudding in her ears. But every time she looked back, the road was empty. Hours later, she finally reached her destination, pulling into her sister's driveway like she'd been chased the entire way. She staggered out of the car, barely able to catch her breath. Her sister thought she was sick from the heat, but Clara didn't tell her the truth. Some things were better left unspoken. Still, in the weeks that followed, Clara avoided long drives. Even in the city, sometimes when headlights swept across her windshield. She swore she saw a pale figure reflected for just a split second. Thumb out, waiting. Would you like me to now carry this same expansion style forward into story 3? And start fresh with new dread-building chapters? Clara tried to shake it off. She told herself he was just some unlucky traveler stuck in the middle of nowhere. But 10 minutes later, her headlights illuminated another figure up ahead. Her blood ran cold. It was the same man, same clothes, same pale face, standing with his thumb raised. Clara's foot pressed harder on the gas. She knew she hadn't passed any cars, hadn't seen headlights behind her. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of her on foot. Her breath came faster. She gripped the wheel, whispering to herself that she was tired, that her mind was playing tricks. But when it happened again, only a few miles later, she felt her chest tighten. He wasn't thumbing this time. His arm hung loosely by his side. His head tilted toward her as she passed, his sunken eyes reflecting the glare of her headlights. Clara's heart pounded. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. Clara pressed her foot harder on the gas, but no matter how fast she went, it didn't feel like she was escaping. The road stretched on forever, a black ribbon under the pale glow of her headlights. She tried to tell herself she was just hallucinating from exhaustion, but deep down, she didn't believe that. Every time she saw him, it felt more real than the last. She gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, sweat dripping down her forehead despite the cold desert air blowing through the cracked window. She kept checking her mirrors, but the back of the highway was empty. There was no sign of life behind her, no cars, no headlights. And yet, she knew he would be there again up ahead. Her heart stopped when she saw the outline appear once more in the distance. He was closer to the center of the road this time, forcing her to swerve slightly to avoid him. As she passed, she risked a glance, and what she saw nearly made her lose control of the car. His eyes weren't just staring anymore. They were locked onto hers, unblinking, as though he had been waiting for that exact moment. Clara let out a strangled cry and turned the radio up as loud as it would go, trying to drown out the pounding in her chest. But it didn't matter. She could still feel him. His presence clung to the car like a shadow, like the night itself had teeth. She rolled the window all the way down, hoping the cold air would jolt her awake. But even the rush of wind couldn't chase away the sickening fear twisting in her stomach. Minutes blurred together. Each mile felt like a trap, each curve a setup for the next horror. Clara was shaking now, whispering prayers to herself, begging the road to end. Her headlights picked up the figure again, and she nearly slammed on the brakes. This time, he was standing on her side of the road, closer than ever, his face fully illuminated for a split second. His mouth was open, jaw slack, but no sound came out. She sped past him, heart hammering, eyes stinging with tears. She thought about pulling over, about calling someone, but her phone had no signal out here. Besides, who would believe her? She wasn't even sure she believed herself. The desert was swallowing her whole, and she was starting to feel like she would never get out. Another 10 minutes, another sighting, but this time the man wasn't standing still. As her headlights swept across him, she swore his head turned to follow her, his body shifting slightly as though he might step into the road. She screamed, pressing the accelerator down as far as it would go, the speedometer needle climbing higher than she'd ever dared before. The fear wasn't just in her chest anymore, okay? It was in her whole body, crawling up her spine, settling into her bones. She couldn't stop seeing his face, pale, hollow, endless. She knew she couldn't keep driving like this forever, but what choice did she have? Kev. She stopped. She was certain he would be there, waiting for her. The longer she drove, the more hopeless it felt. Her eyes burned, her hands ached from gripping the wheel, and her vision was beginning to blur. Yet every time she thought about closing her eyes, she saw him waiting on the side of the road, not fading, not leaving, just waiting. By now, Clara wasn't even sure if she was moving forward at all. The highway stretched on endlessly, the desert on either side like a black ocean. It was as if she were trapped in a loop, destined to see that man again and again, his lifeless stare reminding her that some roads aren't meant to be traveled at night. The road seemed endless now, every curve in the highway filled with dread. Clara cranked the radio up, rolled her window down all the way, and even slapped her own cheek to stay focused. She begged herself not to look, but every mile dragged her eyes back to the shoulder, and every few miles, There he was. The same stance, the same sickening stillness, staring at her as she passed. Once, she swore she saw his lips curl slightly, like the faintest hint of a smile. Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, and tears welled in her eyes. "Please stop," she whispered to herself, voice trembling. "Please, just stop." But it didn't. He was waiting, every time. Felt less like she was driving past him, and more like he was waiting for her specifically, showing himself just enough to be seen. 40 minutes dragged by like hours. Clara's body ached from the tension, every muscle stiff. She prayed for lights, for signs of a town, anything. Finally, in the distance, she spotted a faint glow. Relief flooded her chest. A town. Clara's eyes burned from staring too long, every shadow on the road blending into another. Her body was tight with fear, her grip welded to the steering wheel, like letting go would mean death. She tried to keep her gaze forward, but the sides of the highway tugged at her vision, pulling her toward the edges where he always seemed to wait. The next time she saw him, he wasn't standing perfectly still like before. His head tilted as though he'd been caught mid-turn, like he'd been expecting her and wanted to watch her come closer. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and she swerved slightly, terrified she'd run straight into him. The image of his pale face in her headlights burned into her mind even after she'd sped past. Her heart thumped so hard it made her chest ache. The radio, once blaring to drown out the silence, seemed meaningless now, just static filling the car. She turned it off, realizing it only made the emptiness worse. In that silence, every little sound was magnified. The hum of the tires, the faint rattle of the dashboard, and what she swore sounded like breathing behind her. She refused to look in the rearview mirror. The idea of catching something in the back seat, even for an instant, was unbearable. Still, she couldn't stop imagining him crouched behind her, face inches away, waiting for her to notice. Her eyes darted up, despite herself, but the mirror only showed the empty back seat, bathed in faint dashboard glow. Her body was trembling now. Every mile felt like it was tearing pieces off her sanity. The worst part was knowing he'd be there again. It wasn't a question of if, it was when. And when the outline appeared up ahead once more, her breath broke in short gasps. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He stood closer to the lane this time, as if daring her to stop, daring her to meet him. She pushed the gas harder, the car roaring louder against the night. The desert blurred by, but he remained fixed in her mind, always waiting. Clara's throat was dry, her tongue heavy as she whispered over and over, "Just end. Please let it end." But the road had no mercy. It went on and on, stretching her fear into something unbearable. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon constantly now, desperate for a sign of life, of safety. But every glow she thought she saw in the distance turned out to be nothing more than a trick of the headlights. Each false hope left her emptier, weaker, and more afraid. At one point, she thought she saw movement in the desert itself, not just at the shoulder of the road. A shape drifting in the black emptiness, pacing the car as if it belonged to the same man. It kept with her, not falling behind, not fading away. She blinked hard, tears rolling down her cheeks, but when she opened her eyes again, the shape was gone. By then, Clara was beginning to wonder if she'd ever see the end of that highway. Her whole world had narrowed down to asphalt, headlights, and the figure that haunted the edge of her vision. She couldn't even remember what it felt like to feel safe. And then, finally, a glow appeared far ahead. This one didn't fade. It grew brighter as she approached, flickering neon lights and the faint outlines of buildings. The sight made her choke back a sob of relief, her body almost collapsing with the weight of release. For the first time in hours, she believed she might survive the night. Do you want me to keep expanding this until she enters the motel and talks with the clerk? Or should I pause the tension here and let the motel scene act as the next chapter? She pulled into a rundown motel lot, the buzzing neon sign flickering above. She slammed the car into park, grabbed her bag, and rushed inside. The clerk behind the desk looked startled at the sight of her. Red eyes, tears streaking down her face. She practically begged for a room. When he handed her the key, she blurted out what she'd seen on the road. His expression shifted instantly. His pale face grew even whiter, and his voice dropped. "You're not the first one to tell me that," he said quietly. Clara stared at him, her skin crawling. The man leaned forward slightly. "People have been seeing that hitchhiker for decades. Some say he died out there a long time ago. Others say he's still waiting for someone to stop, okay?" His voice faltered as he glanced toward the window. "The ones who do pick him up, they're never seen again." That night, Clara barely slept. Even now, years later, she says sometimes when she's driving alone at night, she still catches glimpses of a pale figure in the glow of her headlights. "Always waiting," ChatGPT said. The clerk's words echoed in her head long after she'd left the front desk. The hallway leading to her room smelled faintly of mildew, the kind of smell that made her stomach twist. Every creak of the old floorboards beneath her feet set her nerves on edge. She fumbled with the key, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries before she got the door open. Inside, the room wasn't much better. A single lamp buzzed weakly in the corner, its yellow glow casting long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The bedspread looked like it hadn't been washed in years, but Clara didn't care. She locked the door, slid the chain across, and collapsed onto the bed. Her chest rose and fell in uneven bursts as she tried to calm herself. She turned on the TV, hoping the noise would drown out the silence, but the signal was poor. Static filled the screen more often than not, breaking into faint shapes that flickered in and out. At one point, she swore the blur of static looked like a figure standing by the side of the road, motionless and pale. Her hand shot to the remote, turning it off immediately. The silence returned, heavier than before. Clara lay there with the lamp on, staring at the door. She thought about the clerk's words. The ones who pick him up are never seen again. She wondered how many people had been unlucky enough to stop, how many had disappeared on this same stretch of road. The thought made her chest tighten until she could hardly breathe. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Clara jumped, her heart in her throat. She rushed to the window and pulled the curtain back just slightly. The parking lot looked empty, except for her car. The only light came from the buzzing neon sign, flickering on and off. But she could have sworn she'd heard footsteps a moment earlier, dragging slowly past her door. She pulled the curtain shut, her pulse hammering in her ears. She tried to convince herself it was another guest, someone just arriving late. But the lot had looked empty, too empty. She sat back on the bed, hugging her knees to her chest. The chain lock rattling faintly every time the wind shook the old building. Hours passed like that. Clara didn't sleep, not even for a moment. She sat frozen, staring at the door, waiting for the sound of someone trying to handle. Every so often, she thought she heard movement in the hallway, a slow shuffle, then silence. Once, she thought she heard breathing right outside her door, deep and ragged, as though whoever stood there was waiting for her to open it. By the time the first faint light of dawn crept through the blinds, Clara felt like she'd aged years. Her body was stiff, her face streaked with dried tears. She unlocked the door with trembling hands and stepped into the hallway, praying the sunlight would finally chase the night away. The clerk barely looked at her when she returned the key. His eyes lingered on her face for a moment, but he didn't ask her anything. He didn't need to. Clara could see in his expression that he already knew what she had gone through. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. As she drove away, the desert looked calmer in daylight, almost beautiful. Clara knew she would never take that highway again. Still, even in the safety of the sun, she kept glancing at the side of the road, waiting for a pale figure to appear. and for the rest of her life, she swore she sometimes saw him just for a split second in the glow of her headlights. Always waiting. Story 3. The By-Stop Watcher. Ethan had been on the road for nearly 12 hours, hauling himself across 3 states in his beat-up pickup. His eyes were heavy, the road blurring in front of him, and when he finally spotted a rest stop sign glowing faintly in the distance, relief washed over him. He pulled off the highway, gravel crunching under his tires, as he parked in a nearly empty lot. The rest stop looked deserted. A row of vending machines buzzed under flickering lights, and a small brick bathroom building stood in silence. Only one other car sat in the lot, an old sedan parked crooked against the curb. There were no people in sight. Ethan stepped out, stretching his stiff legs, and the desert air hit him cold and dry. He headed toward the bathroom, but the entire time he felt like someone was watching him. The sensation prickled at the back of his neck, making him glance around, even though he saw no one. The old sedan sat quiet, its windows tinted, too dark to see inside. He told himself it was nothing, just road fatigue messing with him. But when he entered the restroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Ethan's boots echoed against the tile as he stepped further inside, the sound too loud in the hollow restroom. The air smelled damp and sour, like mildew mixed with something metallic. He tried to ignore it, pushing open the first stall door, just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. It swung wide, revealing nothing but cracked porcelain in a broken lock. He moved to the sink, turned the faucet, and watched rusty water sputter out before clearing to a thin trickle. The sound was almost comforting in the stillness, but the relief didn't last. Behind him, one of the stall doors creaked shut, slow and heavy, like someone was closing it carefully. Ethan froze, water dripping from his hands into the basin. He turned quickly, heart racing, but all the stall doors were closed, just as they had been before. He tried to convince himself it was the wind, maybe the air system pulling at the hinges. But the rest stop didn't seem modern enough for anything like that. He wiped his wet hands on his jeans and stood listening. The silence pressed against him, heavier with each second. Then came the sound against footsteps, dragging against the floor, slow and deliberate. They weren't coming from inside the restroom this time. They were outside, circling the building. Ethan's breath caught. Whatever it was, they were moving slowly, as though pacing around him. He waited, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped suddenly, right by the thin restroom wall. He could picture someone standing there, pressed up against the bricks, listening for him, just as he was listening for them. He backed toward the exit, his hand trembling on the handle, and he finally shoved the door open. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp. The lot looked empty, but his eyes locked instantly on the old sedan. Its headlights were off, windows still tinted black, but he could feel the weight of someone inside watching him. The driver's silhouette was faintly visible now, sitting unnaturally still. Ethan told himself not to look, to just get back to his truck and leave. But his curiosity betrayed him. He stared a second too long at that car, and in that instant, the figure inside tilted its head slowly toward him. Not a full turn, just enough to show it had been aware of him all along. His chest tightened, and adrenaline flooded his body. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the curb as he sprinted to his truck. His hand shook so violently he could barely get the keys into the ignition. When the engine roared, it felt like the loudest sound in the world, echoing across the empty lot. The sedan never moved, but Ethan's eyes stayed glued to it as he tore out of the rest stop. Gravel sprang behind his wheels. He thought he saw the figure's head following his truck, turning smoothly as though it could watch him no matter how far he drove. Even after the building shrank in his mirrors, that image wouldn't leave him. Hours later, long after he'd left the rest stop miles behind, Ethan checked his mirror again. His stomach dropped. For just a split second, he swore he saw headlights behind him, trailing at a distance, keeping pace. But when he blinked, The highway stretched empty again. His grip tightened on the wheel as the truth sank in whatever he had seen back there wasn't bound to that rest stop. It could follow. The restroom was dimly lit, the fluorescent tubes above flickering with a faint buzz. One of the sinks dripped slowly, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. Ethan stepped into a stall, the metal door creaking as it shut. He sat down, rubbing his face with both hands, trying to shake off the exhaustion. That's when he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing across the tile floor. Someone had just walked in. He froze, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside his stall. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a soft scrape, like a shoe twisting against the floor. Ethan's breath caught. Could see a shadow now, just beneath the stall door, motionless. He waited, his heart pounding, but the person didn't move, didn't walk away, didn't say anything, just stood there. Finally, Ethan mustered the courage to speak. "Hey, someone in here." His voice cracked from the dryness in his throat. No response. The shadow didn't move an inch. Ethan leaned forward, trying to peek through the crack of the door. But before he could, the shadow shifted slightly, like the person was leaning closer to the door, too. Trying to see him, Ethan jerked back, panic flooding his body. Ethan's breathing grew louder in his own ears, every inhale shaky and uneven. The shadow stayed rooted in place, and the silence pressed heavier against him than the darkness itself. He sat frozen, gripping the sides of the toilet like bracing himself against an earthquake. His mind raced with possibilities. Someone messing with him, a drunk, a homeless man, but none of them explained why the figure refused to speak. Then the shadow moved. Not away, not toward the exit, but closer, lowering as if the person were crouching. Ethan's heart hammered so hard he thought the stall door itself might rattle with it. He shifted his feet, pulling them back so they couldn't be seen under the door. He wanted to scream, but the sound caught in his throat, trapped by terror. Almost like fingertips grazing the metal of the door, tracing it gently from one side to the other. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, praying it would stop, but the sound dragged on, slow and deliberate, as though whoever was outside was testing the barrier between them. Suddenly, silence. He opened his eyes, sweat dripping down his face, straining to hear anything. The shadow was gone. He leaned forward cautiously, peeking down at the thin line of light near the floor. Nothing. His body sagged in relief, though every muscle was still tense. He whispered to himself, "It's over. It's fine," though even he didn't believe it. He pushed the stall door open slowly, the rusty hinges groaning. His restroom looked empty, eerily calm. The air felt heavier, as if the room itself had been watching him. He stepped toward the sinks, splashed cold water on his face, and forced himself to breathe. Her reflection stared back at him, pale and wide-eyed. For a moment, he felt silly, embarrassed that he'd been so terrified. But then, something shifted in the mirror. Behind him, in the corner of the room, a figure stood in the shadow stall, unmoving, watching. Ethan's blood froze. He spun around instantly, but the corner was empty. Nothing was there. His chest rose and fell in panic bursts as he turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone, just his own reflection, trembling and broken. He gripped the sink, trying to stop the shaking, but the fear was too heavy. He couldn't stay another second. He rushed for the door, shoving it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The night air hit him like ice, but it wasn't relief that washed over him. The lot was silent, and the old sedan was still parked crookedly under the dim light. This time, though, he could see someone in the driver's seat, chest barely lit. A face, pale and still, turned directly toward him. Ethan froze, his body refusing to move, every instinct screaming to run, but his legs locked in place. The figure in the sedan didn't blink, didn't stir. It simply stared. And though the car was yards away, Ethan felt as though those eyes were pressed right against his own. His paralysis broke, and he sprinted toward his truck, fumbling for the keys in his pocket. His hands were so slick with sweat, they nearly slipped from his grasp. He shoved them into the ignition and turned it, the engine roaring to life. He slammed the locks down just as his headlights illuminated the sedan one last time. The seat looked empty now. For what felt like minutes, the shadow stayed in place, unmoving. Ethan's mind raced. Maybe it was some prank, some drunk messing around, but every instinct in his body screamed. It wasn't normal. Slowly, the shadow moved away, the footsteps echoing softly as the person walked toward the sinks. Ethan sat frozen, waiting to hear the door open, but it never did. Instead, silence settled back into the restroom. He couldn't take it anymore. He shoved the stall door open and stepped out quickly, scanning the room. It was empty, completely empty. The stalls beside his were open. The sinks reflected nothing but his own pale face, and the door was shut tight. Ethan's breath came in short bursts. He knew he had heard footsteps. He knew he had seen that shadow, but the bathroom was deserted. He rushed to the sink, splashed cold water on his face, and tried to convince himself he was imagining things. When he looked up into the cracked mirror, his stomach dropped. Behind him, in the reflection, a figure stood at the far corner of the room, tall and thin, watching him. Ethan spun around so fast he almost lost his footing, but the corner was empty. The cracked tiles stared back at him, plain and lifeless. His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, and the buzzing of a single fluorescent light above him felt louder than it should. He turned back to the mirror, half expecting to see the figure again, but the glass reflected only his own panicked face. He lingered there, gripping the sink, trying to steady his breathing. Then a soft sound echoed through the restroom, one stall door creaking shut with a heavy metallic thud. His stomach twisted as his eyes darted to the row of stalls. Each door was closed, yet the air in the room felt suddenly occupied, charged. Ethan whispered, "Hello?" His voice cracked, carrying no authority. Silence answered him. His body screamed to leave, but something anchored him to the spot. The fear of turning his back on the stalls was almost worse than staying. He took a step back, his shoes squeaking against the wet floor. The silence didn't last. A low, dragging sound began from inside one of the stalls, like feet shuffling slowly along tile. The noise scraped through the room, then stopped suddenly. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket for his phone. He wanted to use the flashlight, but when he pulled it out, the screen stayed black. Dead battery. His luck had run out. Gathering the little courage he had left, he approached the stalls one by one. He pushed the first door open empty. The second, nothing. He paused at the third, the one where he thought the noise had come from. The metal latch was trembling slightly, as though it had just been touched. His throat went dry. Summoning all his nerve, he shoved the door open. It slammed against the divider with a bang, and he jumped back, ready for something to lunge out. But the stall was vacant. Only a faint wet footprint marked the floor, leading from the toilet to the door. Ethan backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off that single print. The restroom felt like it was closing in on him. He couldn't stand it anymore. He turned and bolted for the exit, slamming through the heavy door into the cold night air. His lungs filled greedily with the outside air, but the sense of dread clung to him like a shadow. He looked toward his truck, ready to run for it, but then he noticed the sedan again. Its headlights had come on, pale beams cutting across the cracked asphalt. The engine purred faintly, though no one had gotten out. No one had made a sound. Ethan's legs felt like stone. He knew someone was inside, and he knew they'd been waiting for him to come out. The driver's silhouette shifted slightly, a subtle movement, like a person leaning closer to the wheel. Ethan's skin prickled. He forced himself to move, jogging stiffly toward his truck, his eyes never leaving the sedan. The closer he got, the stronger the feeling grew that whoever was in that car wasn't just watching him, but waiting for him specifically. When he finally reached his truck, he yanked the door open and climbed inside, locking it immediately. His hands fumbled on the keys, slipping in his sweat before he finally managed to start the engine. His headlights illuminated the empty lot, but the sedan's headlights flickered off at the exact same moment. Ethan's tires screamed against the asphalt as he shot back onto the highway, his truck rattling like it might come apart under the strain. He pressed the accelerator down harder than he ever had before, desperate to put miles between himself and that rest stop. The night stretched out endlessly in front of him, black sky meeting black road, his headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through it all. He glanced into the mirror every few seconds, his eyes burning from the strain. Each time the road behind him was empty, but that did nothing to ease the panic. His mind kept replaying the pale face in the sedan, staring with an expression that was too blank to be human. The thought made his grip on the steering wheel ache. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The adrenaline began to burn away, leaving only exhaustion and an gnawing sense of dread. He turned the radio on just for some noise, but every station was nothing but static. After a while, he shut it off again, and the silence in the cab of the truck felt unbearable. That's when he saw it. In the distance, barely visible in his mirrors, a pair of headlights flicked on. They were far away at first, almost blending with the stars on the horizon. But as the seconds passed, they grew brighter, closer, like a predator stalking quietly but closing in fast. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He tried to convince himself it was just another traveler, someone else driving the late hours of the night. But the way the lights stayed locked onto him, unwavering, sent a cold certainty through his chest. It was the sedan. It had followed him. He pushed his foot down harder, the speedometer climbing past 80, then 90. His truck shook violently, every bolt rattling, but the lights behind him stayed fixed, gaining ground with each mile. His eyes watered as he squinted into the mirror. He could just make out the faint outline of the car gliding along the road too smoothly, as if it were floating. Piled on the longer he drove, the more the road seemed to stretch unnaturally, with no exits, no signs of life at all. Just him, his truck, and the headlights that refused to let go of him. His skin prickled with the sickening thought that maybe he wasn't on any real highway anymore. Maybe he'd left something behind when he ran from that bathroom. And now he was stuck on this endless stretch with whatever was following him. The lights grew closer until they filled his mirror completely, washing the inside of his cab in harsh white. Ethan's hands trembled as he kept both eyes on the road, refusing to look back again. His pulse pounded in his ears, each beat louder than the last. Then, suddenly, the lights were gone, just like that. The road behind him was swallowed in darkness. Relief flooded him, but it was poisoned by confusion. Cars don't just vanish at 90 miles per hour. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Nothing. He tried to calm his breathing, forcing himself to believe it was over. But deep down, he knew better. He dared one more look into the mirror. His blood turned cold. There was no car, no headlights, but there was a pale face staring back at him from the back seat of his truck, illuminated only by the faint dashboard glow.